I just wanted to give a few observations around leadership and happiness. And I think what's kind of struck me this morning, and I know speaking to a few of you at coffee time, there's something around HR and this whole piece around the leadership and the senior management of our agencies kind of getting where we're coming from, which then also kind of gets me thinking about leadership and our leaders. And I'm sure we all struggle or think about what we can do in terms of the development of our leaders and what is a leader. And we've just produced a leadership charter at SMG, and what does that mean and how do you bring it to life, and do you need to start getting your leadership team up and down mountains and building tents and floating on rafts? I'm not sure you do. I think it probably has a role, but I'm not totally convinced. And some thoughts that I came across earlier this year was following the Sunday Times Top 100, which we were very fortunate to get into this year, along with, I know, with a number of other agencies. And I was fortunate enough to go to hear Best Companies, who are sort of the parallel auditing company of the Sunday Times Top 100, who had a very interesting speaker called Sean Acor, who is quite a famous American sociologist, psychologist, researcher person. He's written a very interesting article in the Harvard Business Review, which I will circulate to the IPA to give to you, which was really looking at the impact of our behaviour and how people's behaviour has an impact and how behaviour matters, which I think we kind of get. We kind of know that, you know, the grumpy boss who, I used to have a grumpy boss in a PR agency many years ago, who you would know the minute you walked through the door, whether he said hello to you, whether he banged his briefcase on the table, whether he slammed his chair, you would know what kind of day you were in for, you know, depending on what that behaviour was. So there's something in here around being aware of behaviour as leaders and what we can do to be changing our behaviour, because we are leaders as well with our teams, the roles that we play in our business, as well as thinking about our senior leaders, to be really clear about how our behaviour matters. So I thought this was quite interesting as well. And again, I was quite struck, because I think a number of you were this morning, with Andy Fennell. You know, when we start talking about leadership, which then starts shaping a culture. We had the lovely PhD film, you know, I Run PhD, fantastic. You know, thinking about the leadership that came across just in that very brief clip of the guy who does run PhD. You got a real sense of what he's all about as a leader. And there are some interesting stats that came out of the Best Companies piece. So Best Companies have a rating system. I don't know if you're all aware. 1 to watch, so people who are kind of emerging as a best company, a 1-star, a 2-star, and the top star is to get 3 stars. I'm just going to put my glasses on because I can't read the screen. Shows how old I am. So an interesting stat here, that CEOs who spend time listening to their people, of the thousands of companies that they survey, some interesting stats. To be a 3-star company, so to be a tip-top best company, 40.4% of CEO time is spent listening to people. So when people talk to me, my HR director accused me of HR fluff a few weeks ago. That isn't fluff. So if we're talking about engagement and talking about people being really inspired, really involved, shaping a fantastic culture, our CEOs and our leaders, not just our CEOs, and I think I'm going to broaden this out to our leaders as well, need to be out there listening to people. It has a big impact. A 2-star company, 20.8% of time is spent listening. And the key is listening, guys, not talking. Our leaders seem to think that broadcasting is a really good way of listening to people. And I sort of try to explain on a regular basis that that's not the case, and you don't need a script to go and listen to somebody. 1-star, 17.6% of CEO time, ones to watch are 9.7%, and the people who aren't accredited at all, so the people who didn't even make the ranking, have got CEOs only spending 7% of their time listening to their people. So there's something in here about, as leaders, we need to be thinking about the impact of our behaviour, and we need to be thinking about the sorts of things that we can do to help us in order to then be able to help our people. And to set this kind of up for what we're going to be doing next with Peter and Susan, there's some interesting habits that Sean Acor suggests at an individual level to start changing some of the habits that we've all probably created throughout our working lives and indeed our personal lives. And bear with me, because some of these ideas are probably going to be new to some of you, and you're probably going to be thinking, why the heck do I need to do that? Our brains are programmed to scan for the negative So I don't know about you, but I used to go to bed at night thinking, oh crumbs, I could have done that letter better and my email wasn't quite right, and tomorrow I really should ring Rob, and I'm really a bit anxious about that presentation in the morning. And our brains will scan for the negative. There's a great piece that we do with our parent practice, our parenting coaching skills courses that we run, whereby they show a lovely sentence, beautiful joined up handwriting, that says, the cat sat on the mat, and the mat is spelt with 2 T's. And they say to the group, what do you see? And everybody says, well, you don't spell mat like that. And that's true. You don't spell mat like that. But what we're not noticing is the lovely joined up handwriting, that the letters are even, that, you know, the T's being crossed beautifully to join with the whatever letter. We immediately scan for the negative. So if we are leaders constantly looking for well, that slide isn't right, and you've got a spelling mistake on, you know, deck 22, change it. What kind of an impact are we having on the people around us? And we're all doing it. I'm not saying that we're all not, you know, we all need to go live in Nirvana and start putting joss sticks on and saying, you know, no stress here. But just being aware of what we're doing and the impact we have on people. We're all very busy. You know, oh, that's not right, change that. Living thankfully is one of those things. And what I've started doing with my HR team at Starcom, because they kind of get this now, me having been to India twice, they kind of expect it when I come back, is that we occasionally start our meetings with some gratitudes. And that isn't about, you know, big long sermons about it, but it's about being aware of what we're grateful for. Because we're all too obsessed in this culture of focusing on the handbag and the shoes and the house and the car and whatever else it is we all haven't got, rather than focusing on the things that we have got. Doesn't need to be a long list. It might be 3 things. It might be before you go to bed. You might want to do it with your team. But just being aware of being positive. Because if you go around in the world being positive, guess what? It's going to ripple out as being positive. If you go around being Mr. and Mrs. Grumpy, guess what? You're going to go around rippling being Mr. and Mrs. Grumpy. Journaling is another nice idea. So just reflecting perhaps on a lovely thing that happened today. You know, perhaps one of the speakers might want to do a little paragraph to themselves about how they enjoyed being here today. But just acknowledging the good stuff that is going on in your day. Sensible exercising. There's all sorts of sports psychology, science around the benefits of exercising. I won't go into all of that. But the importance is about doing sensible exercise. This isn't about saying, as someone who's never really jogged in her life, I'm going to go and do the London Marathon next year, because that's rubbish, because I'll just damage myself and it won't be very good. But some sensible exercising, going out, to go for a walk around the block for 10 minutes. You know, I know that lunch breaks are a big issue for you and our people. Go outside for 10 minutes. We've all got 10 minutes whereby we can just refresh, recharge, and come back with a slightly different perspective on life. Random acts of kindness. This is a nice one to do. I'm sure we've probably all had people who've passed away in our lives, but how often do you write all the lovely things down about how great that person was once they're dead? That was a bit rubbish, wasn't it? Did we actually say it to them when they were alive? No, we don't, because we're all far too busy saying, can you do this, and can you change that, and can you do the other? And I actually started this a while ago, whereby every day I was writing a little note to someone to say thank you very much for whatever it was I acknowledged and recognised in them, which is fine until you start doing it with men. And then I suddenly got these people contacting me saying, why have you just sent me that? And then I had to explain what it was all about. It was about me being aware of the positive stuff and acknowledging and recognising the positive stuff in other people. And we've had some of that this morning. You know, we had Rob talking about it. I think we had Kate talking about it, certainly Jan from Sapient Nitro. It's about respecting and acknowledging people and just taking 5 minutes of our time, 3 minutes of our time, just to say that thank you, write that note, recognise the good stuff in people, which as leaders we're all too busy sometimes doing. And the other important one on here, which is number 4, not number 5, is this concept of meditation and mindfulness. This is very much now on the government's agenda, this whole agenda around well-being, which again is what we've been talking a little bit about this morning. I'm sure we've all got lovely policies in place and doing all sorts of things with on-site GPs and all the great stuff, being very aware of our duty of care. But the thing that's bothering me the most in our world at the minute is it's all getting faster. It's not getting any slower anytime soon. And the jobs that our people are doing are getting bigger. I kind of have an image sometimes in my head. Do you remember when you were at school in 1822 and your mum would buy you a really big duffel coat and you would grow into the duffel coat? Do you remember that? our people are almost wearing big, big duffel coats, which they're trying to grow into. The average age of our people is around about 30, 31 in an agency. These people are being made managers 3, 4, 5 years into their careers, which is fantastic because they're all super talented people like Pippa and Nathan here this morning. But it's just about being aware that we're doing new business pitches, we're doing fantastic presentations, we're here, we're there, we've got lots of work to do, we're trying to learn digital. It's all kind of running away with us. So what is it that we can do as HR people to help support our people in a world that isn't slowing down? And that's why we're going to give you the opportunity this morning to try a little bit at what this mindfulness piece is all about. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. So I just wanted to give you some thoughts around our behaviour, because I do believe that the changes that we can really help our people with operate at the level of attitude, skills and behaviours. If you don't work at that level, you just keep moving around from agency to agency, taking you with you, because you're not actually working at the level of changing anything about how you are behaving, how you're impacting on people. And even if you just tried one of those, just try one of those for 2 minutes for 21 days and just see what might happen. You might be surprised. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. I'm very happy to talk about that. I can talk about that for ages, but we haven't got time today. So just thinking about our duty of care and thinking about all the great things that I know in this room are being done as HR departments, be very aware and mindful of the pressures that our people are under.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Okay, you're not allowed to drop off just yet. Yes, I've known Liz for a very long time. I don't think it was 1822, I think it was actually 1722. but there we are. I've got a number of slides, and I'm going to say don't worry about getting all of the detail down and so on, because I've got a web reference for you later so that you can go and get all of the slides as a PDF. And even better, I've got a couple of psychological tools that you can go and access and go and have a little play with. So I'll give you the reference at the end, of course. One of the things that psychologists love to do, apart from experimenting on their fellow humans, is to measure things. And I'm particularly interested in measuring the subjective, measuring things that people say that you can't measure, and then doing something with the information that comes from that. I'm also quite keen on audience participation. Okay, don't panic. I just got 2 or 3 questions for you. Now, you're all lovely HR people in the main. How many of you are familiar with the expression social capital? Right, 1 or 2? Yeah, 3, 4. Okay. Right, we'll come back to that one. Next question. How many people here are feeling just a little bit too warm? Yeah? Okay. How many people are feeling a little bit cool? Okay. That's quite interesting, isn't it? Same temperature, different perceptions. Okay. So we come back to that, and if I forget, then just remind me, because I'm getting old. Okay. I've had many conversations with Liz, and we've been thinking about getting ahead of the curve for her organisation and so on, thinking about what the next big thing is. And a while back it was stress at work, burnout, which is actually subtly different from stress, but that's probably a little more technical. The trouble with stress, when you talk to organisations and so on, is the perception that it's coming from an angle of ill health. So people don't like to talk about the possibility of being stressed because somehow that's giving away something about yourself which is negative. And at the moment we're now moving more into the area of well-being, which is a much more positive thing. And there's a couple of definitions about what well-being is all about. Engagement and contribution are key factors when we look at organisations. The World Health Organization here is thinking in terms of people's everyday lives. The UK government has decided that it's going to look at well-being and measurement of well-being as something which is broadly referred to as social capital. Social capital is going to be the next buzz phrase that you're going to be hearing about, and your organisations are going to be saying to you, what are we doing about social capital? The government has decided that it wants to measure well-being in a form which is akin to GNP, or gross national product, because it wants to inform government policy in future and measure the effectiveness of government policy, not purely in financial terms, not purely in terms of the bottom line, but about people's quality of life. And Liz and I have been looking at basically hijacking what the government are doing and translating it into an organisational context. And there are many overlaps between the two. So we're thinking in terms of the measurement of well-being, possibly into a benchmark measure to be used later on so that we could compare divisions within organisations or organisations within an industry and that type of thing, so that we know where we are on this thing. And then to look at well-being akin to return on investment for an organisation. The government has tasked the Office for National Statistics to work out what well-being is and how to measure it and then what to do with it and so on. So the context for the government or for the ONS is a social context, so that's in terms of where we live and that type of thing, whereas the context we're looking at obviously is the workplace. I'll come back to control and influence, if I may, and demand coping strategies. But again, the government is thinking about impact upon health within the social environment. Here we're thinking about the impact on psychological health and performance and productivity within an organisational environment, and looking towards achieving satisfaction, obviously in an organisational sense in terms of job satisfaction. The key aspect that the government has identified when looking at when people are feeling happy or when their well-being is high is the degree of control and influence over which they have in their everyday lives. So the government is thinking in terms of concepts like the big society, about devolving power further down into local communities, how that's impacting on planning regulations and so on, although that's been shot to pieces recently. In the organisation, my research shows that the single biggest factor that causes people a degree of unhappiness at work is not feeling in control. Not just that they are being controlled, you've got this endless list of things that you're meant to be doing, but somehow feeling that you can't influence adequately what's going on around you. You can't get the resources that you need in order to do the tasks that you've been given. The other aspect which is very important is, do you have the skills, or do your people have the skills and the ability to cope with the demands that are placed upon them? I have to say that the word cope in a more clinical context is not about a lack of ability to do something, so, you know, oh my God, how do I cope with this? It's just about dealing with stuff. So my research then has taken me down the line of working out which factors are important to measure this overall thing of well-being. Well-being isn't just one single thing to measure. We've heard some very, very interesting things this morning about how organisations are trying to measure different aspects. I was quite excited about the idea that if a score on a particular metric drops below a certain level, then it's red alert time and we've got to start paying attention to this. I think that's a very interesting idea. But broadly, the factors of interest fall into two headings: performance factors and health risk factors. We can think of health risk factors as being the outcome. And really, this is when it's starting to become a little bit too late. I'm sure as HR people, you do exit interviews when people are leaving. It's a little bit late. It's valuable information, it's valuable data, but that person is on the way out. You've just now lost some talent, which could have been, and I'm sure it was, very expensive to obtain. When Liz and I have been talking, we talk about the usual things that HR people talk about, such as recruitment and retention. One of the things that Liz is very interested in is the other R, which is reputation. Reputation for your agency, and I'm told that reputation for an agency is something that your clients are very interested in as well, because it can impact on their reputation, positively or negatively. So the health risk factors are the things that we don't really want to get to, because by then things are starting to go wrong. But we are very interested, much more so, in performance factors and in terms of finding out what's going on underneath the surface. So as well as measuring the current state of well-being, that's one of the little toys that I've put on the web for you to go and try if you want to know what your level of well-being is at the moment, and maybe a little insight as to why. You can go along and try that. You can also find out about your attitudes towards control, where the negatives are in terms of your approach, whether you're high on assertiveness or control or low on assertiveness and control. This relates back to this idea about how much do we feel not in control of our lives. The more an individual wishes to be in control, and the less in control that they are, the greater their level of dissatisfaction, because their expectations are not being met. So I've also put an assertiveness test on there that you can go and try. You can go and find out how you are on there. We've heard about Google today. Google Analytics tell me that up to 35% of the people in the world who research wanting to take an assertive measure come to me. The assertiveness measure that's available for you to try there is very well validated and researched, and it might be something that you would like to go and try for free. And don't worry, it's all anonymous. Okay. Okay. Just a couple of words, just looking at headings and so on. These are the main areas concerned with the strategies that people use to to cope with the demands placed on them within the workplace. We've heard about some of those, and we're going to talk about another couple in a moment. But this is the area that I'm really interested in. What is satisfaction? How do you measure happiness? What is satisfaction? Somebody may be satisfied with a salary of $120,000 a year. Some people may not. What's the difference? The difference really all goes back to expectations. The equation, if you like, for satisfaction is how much an expectation in a particular domain is met or not met. if you get in early as an organisation in terms of discovering what people's expectations are across all of these areas, then you will probably be in a position where you can start to head off the issues before they become issues. The downside of this, of course, is that it creates work for managers. And managers think, oh my goodness, no, it's another HR initiative. Okay, that's the normal response, isn't it? And as HR people, you tell them, no, but if you can give this some space, you'll actually be able to make your life easier for you a little bit down the line. Okay. The importance of satisfaction for the organisation. Some people like models and graphs and diagrams, some people don't, and so on. I'll just talk you through this very briefly. If we look at productivity within the organisation, how do we increase productivity? Well, the first thing that we do is that we increase demand. Demand can come from outside of the individual. They're tasks which are given to people. Demand can come from within the individual. It can be ambition, and so on. People create their own demands within themselves. Organisations create demand. The theory is that the more well-equipped people become in order to cope with the demand, then productivity will rise. It's quite a reasonable argument. The greatest mitigating factor in terms of whether or not productivity will rise is the role of satisfaction. And remember, satisfaction is the meeting of expectations or not. Giving people sufficient, that really engages them. We've heard some fantastic stuff from some young people earlier today about the relative freedom that they have in progressive organisations who are willing not to maintain traditional boundaries in terms of thinking what you can do, at what age you can do it, what gender you are when you do it, and so on. If expectations are met by the organisation, and the onus there is twofold, that first of all the individual has a realistic expectation, and the extent to which the organisation can meet those expectations, increase in workplace satisfaction can provide an uplift on its own to productivity. If an individual is completely demoralised, for example, no matter how much stick or carrot that you may be using, no matter how much they think that they really need to get their act together for the sake of their career, it's not going to happen. Okay. So I promised you at the beginning a reference. The site that we use for our measurement activities, which is by invitation only. If you go to the main page of the site, there is no access to anywhere. The various routes in are very strictly controlled. That's a typical psychologist at play. I'd like you to come and play in my laboratory. So the route in for yourselves, if you like, is the /IPA 2012 there at preciseinsight.com. There you'll find these slides. You'll also find the assertiveness measure, a measure to find out your current level of well-being, and also a little stress measure as well, to find out, are you heading for a potential problem? Okay, so go and take those if you dare. Nobody's looking over your shoulder, apart from Google Analytics, of course, and just go and have a look. Have a look to see what you think.